Point number one, and this is going to sound a little bit controversial and a little bit, kind of out of the ordinary, but the first critical mistake that I see is that most teams try to use too many Jira features. And I'm going to give you a very specific example because I've seen this all over LinkedIn. I may even be guilty of doing this at some point, to be honest. But you've probably seen something along the lines of, if you use Jira for simple task tracking and don't do 100 different things and use every single possible feature, that's like using a Ferrari to pick up your groceries. And I've seen this a whole bunch. Like everyone says, oh, Jira is so powerful. You can do so much with it. There's so much you should be utilizing it. There's so many features that you're not using today that you should be using. And I actually don't like to think of it that way. And the reason I don't like that is because it infers that Jira needs to be complicated. And that is just simply not true. Jira does not need to be complicated. In fact, a lot of times when I've worked to implement Jira for companies and organizations, I remember doing a migration from Asana to Jira for a particular company, Kin Insurance. And it was like all of their marketing teams, their business teams, all that. And those, if you know marketing teams, they're very particular on the way that they work, the UI, the simplicity of the features and tools that they use. And we did the migration and got them into Jira. And the way that we implemented the Jira projects for them and the structure that we created was simpler than what they had in Asana. And all this to say that Jira doesn't need to be complicated. And there's a few things that I'll show in a demo really quickly that give you very specifics on how you should structure a Jira project depending on the team that you're in, which is I think what most people do wrong. But it does not need to be complicated. In fact, I always lean towards how simple can we make this? Simple is always better. Less is more. Simplicity beats complexity. And the reason I always lean into simplicity is for a few key reasons. Number one, things are just less prone to breaking. Like you're not going to be breaking a workflow that is to do in progress and done. Like that is a very hard workflow to break. Whereas if you have a lot of complex transitions, 20 to 30 statuses with validators, all that kind of stuff, and you make one small change, that could cascade and just break everything in the entire workflow. So the simpler something is, the harder it is to break it. And it just works. That's just kind of the bottom line. It typically just works. So number one, it's just easier to manage and it's harder to break. Number two, it actually gets more adoption from teams. You could imagine like jumping into a workflow that is, let's say like 20 statuses long, and I have to go through and like migrate every single card through every single column. That is just a pain to even think about. But if you have 3 statuses, to do in progress done, that makes me a lot more likely to go in there and actually use that process and system that someone built out for me. So we want to make things simple and as less complicated as possible. Now I'll share my screen and show you a very couple of specific examples that I like to use whenever creating new boards. And this really boils down to a couple of things, but I'll share creating your project first, because I think this is where teams run into the first mistake. And if I show you exactly how to create this project, I'll walk you through which team should be creating which projects. And there is some variability here, but this is kind of the rule of thumb that I like to use whenever creating a new space. So I'll go to create new, and you'll be met immediately with like all of these templates, right? And you think like, if you're a marketing team, you go in here, HR go here, finance go here. I actually think this is a little bit misleading and a little bit too complicated to understand for most individuals. I even have a hard time understanding what all of these templates do. I actually just go down straight to the product and I'd click on one of the product options. And really, for the most part, I would say 99% of the time, you're going to be using either Jira or Jira Service Management. Now, if you're a service team, this is anybody who does customer support, IT support, HR. When you have a ticket coming into you and you need to resolve it or complete it, you're going to be looking at Jira Service Management. I always like to start out with a blank space because that's kind of the core basic building block, and you could pretty much do anything on top of that. That being said, you can kind of look through some of these and see if they'll resonate with you. You might just have to kind of strip some of these layers back after you implement it. With like IT service management, you might need to like remove some work types, remove some workflows that don't quite work for you, but it might be a good starting point. So basically, any service management team, go to service management and start with blank or specific template if you like. Every other team will start inside of Jira. And this is where it gets a little bit confusing and where I think teams make a lot of mistakes. because a lot of times we're told that this Kanban project type is more advanced and like gives you more flexibility, more features, more everything inside of Jira. Now, you should really only be using Kanban or Scrum if you're a development team. In all other cases, you should be starting with what is a blank space. And these are in the same product, but they are two vastly different things that you are set up completely differently on the back end. I'll show you exactly what they look like. But the point here is if you're a software team, you have two options, Kanban or Scrum. And this is if you do software development. If you run sprints, select Scrum. If you run no sprints, select Kanban. Everybody else, literally everybody else, should just be clicking blank space. So you're really left with 4 total options. Service management teams, go to blank space within Jira Service Management. Any kind of software teams, click on Scrum or Kanban, depending on your style of work. Everybody else, just click blank space. Now, some of these templates may be useful. They may be legitimately useful. I always personally start out with a blank space because it's a blank building block, blank slate that you can build on top of. If you're new to Jira, I actually do recommend starting with a template and just playing around with it, seeing how Jira is intended to be used, some of the building blocks there, and kind of working your way up to starting from scratch. So the reason I say do not select Kanban for any of the teams that are non-software teams is because of this. I'll show you 2 different examples of what these projects spaces look like. And they even filter differently. So we have different Jira business spaces and Jira software spaces. And each of these are entirely separate things. So I'll open each one of these up and show you a very specific example. So I'll pull up my software type project. And as you can see here, we have things like components, development, code. If I open up a work item, we have development fields, VS Code, code branches. And this can technically work for like a marketing team, but I do not recommend it because they don't need all of those features. And then you have things like swim lanes, separate boards. It's just more complexity, more things that you don't really need for a team that is not a software development team. And this is entirely different from a space like this. And this is very basic. This is very similar to like any project management tool that you would see out there. You literally have your Kanban board with your statuses. You could go to your list views. You could go to calendar views. You could go to timeline views. There's a whole bunch of options here that you can utilize for a marketing type team, for any kind of task management, project management, anything that you need to accomplish. Even if you're, say, an IT team, you might have a service management project for incoming tickets, but then a lot of times IT teams have like bigger projects that they're working on. And I always recommend using a separate board like this for general IT projects. So to manage like infrastructure refreshes, software licensing, any kind of bigger scope projects that might take more than a few weeks or even months, that can all live in boards in spaces like this. So that's kind of the biggest mistake I see whenever individuals start to use Jira, just because selecting the wrong project will immediately cascade you down the entirely wrong rabbit hole. And that's when we start to see a lot of that Jira hate, where it's like, oh, Jira's too complex. There's just too much involvement there. It's not quite what we were looking for. It's like too techy. And that's kind of the problem. It's just the wrong selection of the project types and spaces, partially due to like the complexity of like how many options there actually are. But those are the only options that you'll need moving forward. And I hope that kind of makes it really easy to select what next space you need to create and the next steps that you need to take to get any of your new teams into using Jira. So that is going to be our less is more simplicity. We want to make sure that number one, we aren't using too many Jira features. And there are even things like adding validators, conditions, a whole bunch of statuses. Like there's so many things we could do in Jira that make it more complicated. That's what we want to avoid. That's literally what I want to avoid for you and your team, because that is what makes all of your team just hate using Jira. Make it enjoyable. Make it something that they almost look forward to on a Monday morning, right? Like I look forward to jumping into Jira, seeing what I have on the docket, seeing what I have to do, what I have to work towards. It makes it really easy for me when I can just jump in and do that and don't have to worry about the myriad of fields and information to fill out. So stop using too many Jira features. Start with simplicity and work your way up if you need to. So that's point number one. And kind of something I wish I knew back in the day, because before I would just kind of think, oh yeah, we need this and that and like everything we could possibly do in every type of project, where just starting with simplicity is absolutely the best way to go and expanding from there. Real quick, if you're running a 10 to 200 person team and you're trying to set this up by yourself, the hardest part really isn't the configuration. It's getting your team to actually use what you built. After implementing Jira over 200 times myself, that's the pattern that I see every single time. Someone builds it out, the end users end up ignoring it, and 6 months later, you're trying to figure out what went wrong and how to fix it. And the mistake most end up making is that they configure the tool first and hope that the team adapts. We actually do the opposite. We fix the underlying process first and then build Jira around it. That's why it ends up sticking. Because we're so hands-on, we operate on a wait list, and our next kickoffs are 4 to 6 weeks out. And if you want to implement Jira so that it actually gets utilized, click the first link in the description.